Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Zalits, and welcome back to the long-awaited tier list update for Post Awakenings. I am so sorry for the delay on this, guys. Now, before I begin, I want to go over a few things that have changed and also give you guys the reason for the delay on making this list. So here goes. I've actually numbered all these, and I've written the entire tier list already, and I'm just pretty much just reading off of what I've written there to save time and have everything just more organized for myself instead of having to think of everything on the spot. So number one, the entire format has been redesigned, as you probably have already seen on the screen right now. I wanted to generalize the ranks more so that it doesn't overemphasize the power gap between a certain group of characters. In the previous design, we had SS tier separated from S tier, but to be honest, the difference between S and SS was so minuscule you could almost merge the two rows together. So I made the gaps more obvious, but with more respect to the characters being placed within those certain ranks. Number two, the B and C tiers have a plus and minus sign because I wanted to try this new grouping method that I thought looked cool and interesting. The characters in the plus signs row, and I'll talk more about this when we get to the actual ranks itself. The characters in the plus sign rows are meant to signify that those characters in particular are very good for this rank and are almost reaching the next tier, but just don't quite have that extra oomph to make it to that next level, to be in like A tier or from C to B tier. The characters in the minus row are the complete opposite of that, and are, in my opinion, on the verge of being lowered for a variety of reasons, but have just enough going for them. They're viable enough to stay at that particular rank, albeit at a very low, at the lower end of that rank. And then finally, the row in the middle is there to show that these characters are B tier flat, and is there to say that these characters belong at this rank, and they are no better and no worse. And number three, the final point here that I have to make, I had postponed making this list because it was a little piece of advice given to me by one of our lead character / event reviewers on the DFFOO forums, Tifa Lockhart. If you guys haven't joined the forums, or if you guys haven't visited the forums, please do, guys. We're always here for you. We're all like, I've been absent for a while, and this is where I've been in the time of absence. So if you ever wanted any updates on why I was not there, that's probably where you should go to come and ask me questions, because that's probably where I'll be if you don't see me uploading for a while. But anyways, she suggested to me that I wait a bit before releasing the new tier list because of the fact that Awakenings were going to be brand new, and without seeing them fully at 60, it would be difficult to gauge just how good or bad a specific character is, which at the time of Awakenings, we could only max them out to like 57-ish, so we couldn't really see the full spectrum of how strong the characters will be like we do now. I agreed with it because we also wouldn't have any characters to really base anything off of, since we already knew, everybody knew, the brand new 60s were going to destroy everything. They're going to stomp out every enemy that we have. They're going to be super strong. So I think waiting was the best option there, since I've gotten to see the best and the worst of the awakened characters at this point. By this point, you know what I mean? Like we've been in Awakenings era for like 2 months now, so I've gotten to see a lot of the different characters at 60-60. So it's easier for me to gauge just where they're at right now, anyways. Now, before I begin with the actual entire review of the entire tier list, I want to give my own little disclaimer that this is my own personal tier list that has been critiqued by a good amount of the outstanding members of the DFFOO forums. Thank you to those of you who have given me valuable input for the choices that I made onto this list. Now, please take what you see with a grain of salt here, because there will most likely be many things that you find conflicting with your own personal views, but keep in mind that tier lists, especially my own, are ever changing, and as time passes, this list will eventually get updated and changed as newer content continues to be released to us on the global side of the game. This is not a JP tier list. Please don't try and compare or make statements saying I should base it on what's to come. Yes, I do get comments like that, especially on some of my previous tier lists. It's like, this is a global tier list. Like, don't bring the JP side into this. And with all that being said, let's just get into the thick of this transformed tier list already. The first one on this list is Cloud, and I will be saying I'm reading this off of my pre-written tier list report that I have already posted up on the DFFOO forums. If you want to go read it instead of listening to me talk about it, I'll leave a link down below where you can go and check that out for yourself. Now let's go ahead and start reading this. Alright, so what can I really say other than Cloud has been fighting his way up to the top since I first began making these tier lists, and after many months of being switched around and flung up and down, he's finally reached his pinnacle. Between his awakening, which has happened quite a bit ago now, and his EX weapon being released, Cloud has definitely carved up the competition and made his way back up into S tier, finally. So what's actually changed for Cloud? What's made him so good? Is probably what some of you guys are asking, and to that I reply, not much. You know, he's still the same guy. I mean, his awakenings were pretty average. It didn't really do much as far as his damage potential and how much, you know, he actually does as a unit altogether. He still has the same amount of paralysis chance. His damage is slightly higher on his first two base abilities, but I mean that's pretty much it. His awakening was there just to literally put him back in line with the other new characters that were being released at the time, like Zac. But his main improvement overall was literally all in his EX, because that thing is just insane, and I'm going to tell you why right now. His Meteor Rain is an AoE 6-hit Bravery plus HP attack, just in case you didn't know. It's ranged, non-elemental, which means it does stack with Bahamut, with an attack modifier of 600%. That is a lot of damage per hit. The damage does evenly spread among all targets in the case of multiple enemies, so that, you know, let's say you cap out at like 25,000 bravery. If there's three enemies, that damage is going to be divided amongst all the targets there. So it'll be like 25,000 divided by 3, and then you guys do the math. The ability also grants Mako for 4 turns, and Mako is a max bravery buff that gives him about 80% increased maximum bravery, and it also gives him bravery regen for like almost 150% of his initial bravery. As you can see, Cloud becomes extremely monstrous with this weapon, and it becomes very apparent why, especially with all the other tools in his disposal, like, you know, having launches and being able to paralyze, why he's actually in S tier and why he's pretty much at the very top, the very tippy top of S tier currently. On to number 2, Terra. Everyone's favorite mage finally became relevant once again after being in such a horrible place during the 50s era, and oh boy does she get strong. So first up, she got her quality of life buzz, which was basically just making her Madoyos cast the spell on the first turn instead of having her have to wait, you know, 2 turns or whatever it was before. After this, she finally got her awakening, which buffed her very significantly, if I do say so myself, as is the case with many other awakened characters. You know, a lot of the characters in the game get really strong with their awakenings, obviously. Getting back to the topic at hand, Meltdown gives her an extra 25% bravery gain on use, which means that whatever her initial bravery is when you first cast this spell, you're going to be getting way more than what you normally do, and on top of that you still get the 15 CP passive to proc, which gives her even more after that, which I don't remember how much it was percentage wise for the 15 CP, but that, you know, it works out together and you get a whole bunch of bravery off of that. It increases the maximum bravery buff by 20% and also gives her a bravery regen buff that restores 40% of her initial bravery every turn for 5 turns. That's a lot, like, you know, for Terra, where she needs to have bravery initially to be able to do her damage. That's a pretty big buff. She's gonna be able to have bravery right off the start after using every single one of her abilities, so she's gonna be able to do as much damage as possible right away. And, you know, from what I've seen with her EX weapon, she can cap out really easily. Anyways, Meteor got its number of hits increased to 15, which increases the overall potency to about 108%, meaning that it's gonna be really easy. Like I said before, it's going to be really easy to cap with this ability, with both of her abilities actually. And then recently she also got her EX weapon, which is just adding on to her already destructive capabilities. It grants her the Riot Blade ability, which is a 3-hit bravery plus HP attack with potency increasing as HP goes down, and also grants her a large max bravery up of 80% for 5 turns. Terra has truly been awakened to come and assert her dominance over this world once again. Next up is His Royal Highness Noctis Lucis Kylum, who warped into battle a few weeks ago ahead of schedule and surprised everybody because nobody expected him to be released when he did. And he definitely made sure to leave his mark on the competition. Like, our boy Noct has a lot of tools at his disposal, making him probably one of the most intricate characters to have arrived on Global so far, because, like, literally just because of his plus abilities. So his first ability, Shooting Star, is an AoE bravery type that grants him a small max bravery up of about 30% for 5 turns. If Noct gets a break or hits an enemy who is broken, his next Shooting Star will become Shooting Star Plus, becoming 20% more potent than its original form, and guarantees a chase on the selected target. And on top of that, it also deals 50 chase damage to all other enemies on the field. And for those of you who don't know what that means, almost all enemies who can be launched have a chase value of 40. This means that Noctis essentially can make an entire crew of enemies launch in just one single attack. His second ability, Warp Strike, is a one-hit single target bravery plus HP attack that grants him an attack up of approximately 30% for 5 turns and follows the same conditions needed for Shooting Star for it to become plus as well. Warp Strike Plus is a 30% stronger version and grants him 1 stack of Armiger. Armiger is a stacking buff on Noctis that gives him 10% extra max bravery to start and an additional 5% per stack. There's a total of 5 stacks for a total of 30%. Armiger stacks also add an additional attack onto Noct's abilities with rising potency starting at 30% per extra attack and an additional 30% per stack. 5 stacks of Armiger means you get 120% potency on this extra attack, which is just ridiculous. His final ability is Conjure Armiger, which is his EX ability. It's a 12-hit melee bravery plus HP attack that raises Armiger level by 3 for 5 turns and also gains an extra bravery attack on target while Armiger stacks are in effect before it's used. Otherwise, you won't trigger that extra attack. Just saying. Noctis offers a lot to the team in terms of longevity and even buffs, since he gives the team a passive 20% increased max bravery so long as he is buffed. That's invisible. It's not like an actual buff on the target. It's an invisible buff. And trust me, there's a lot more to it than that, but I hope that the info I've shown here can give you an idea as to why he's just so powerful right now. The king is good. Up next, we see Warrior of Light, who has for a long time been in the gutters because he was a tank. And as we all know, tanks just were not needed in the 50s era. But with all these recent changes, that's changed. And Warrior of Light is now back stronger than ever with Awakenings that just turned him into a complete beast of a tank in the Awakenings era. Upon awakening, he gets a slight, quote-unquote, max bravery boost of 50% and 10% attack when buffed, which is just insane for any given character. Doesn't mean that it's just, Warrior of Light. If anybody got that buff, it would just be crazy. Shining Shield also got its buff, giving it 2 additional uses as well as increasing the max bravery gain by a whopping 60% for a total of 110% potency to the given target based on Warrior of Light's initial bravery, and also raises that target's max bravery by 20%. Dude, it's like an all-in-one. He's just a battery slash tank slash buffer. It's crazy. His second ability, Throw Buckler, received a much-needed buff as well, granting Warrior of Light a 20% attack buff as well as raising its potency by 20%, meaning it's going to do a little bit more damage, and it's going to give him an extra buff as well. If you don't have a buffer, or if you don't want to run a buffer on your team, he can self-buff himself. And the craziest part about it is that it turns into a bravery plus HP attack, meaning that he does not have to waste additional turns after using the ability. He can just go straight into dealing damage like any other bravery plus HP attacker. Warrior of Light is seriously crazy right now. Even I have been sleeping on this dude because I was just like unaware entirely of what his buff really was until I started to get this feedback from other players telling me that he's just absolutely insane with these buffs. And something that I didn't mention just now was that his shields have been increased as well by 230% of his initial bravery. That's literally like 10,000 damage worth of shields. Like, it's just insane. It's just a massive barrier for your party if you build them correctly and if you run with the right units who can buff him with initial bravery and whatnot. I mean, he buffs himself with initial bravery, but still, you know, if you get him somebody that can buff a higher amount of it or something, you know, it's going to lead to some crazy battery / shielding for your team. Warrior of Light earns this spot hands down and will surely bring you success should you bring him and should you choose to build him up. Moving on to Yuna now. Lady Yuna has been the topic of discussion on how viable she is to use for quite some time now. Ever since the release of her 35 CP during Kuja's event, there was a struggle between many players who were either for her or against her because of her battery potential. With her awakening, there is no doubt that Yuna is hands down the strongest party battery / healer in the game right now. Her first buff comes through as low initial bravery up, giving her a small boost to her initial bravery, while at low bravery giving her a pretty big boost. I want to say it's a pretty big boost. I mean, I've been using her, and it's definitely noticeable after she uses her HP plus attack. Isuna also got a pretty fair buff that slightly increases bravery granted based on initial bravery, and also extends the party's buff durations by 1 turn per set of buffs. This next buff was highly needed because of her max bravery, and it comes in the form of her level 58 crystal passive that gives her a moderate max bravery boost with active buffs. Now, in case you guys haven't used Yuna, or you've been out of the loop for Yuna, she has a very, very pitiful low max bravery. It's just sad, like, you know, she's such a good battery, but her max bravery pool is just very low. So any amount of max bravery that you can get on her is absolutely vital to her being able to give battery and deal damage as well. The final awakening buff given to Yuna was for Cheer, giving it 1 extra use, raising the potency of Face Refuge by 10%, which is her silver bordered buff after you use Cheer, raising the overall value of initial bravery by 40% and defense by 50% in total, and also recovers allies' HP by 30%. Highest, well, I don't want to say the highest, but as far as team-based healing goes, definitely the highest amount of AoE healing we have in the game right now. Mind you, Yuna's weapons turn her abilities into party-wide effects, and Cheer even gives a combo buff of 10% max bravery and 20% regen based on initial bravery, and a small attack up. So she gets an all-in-one package. She's a buffer, she's a battery, and she's a healer. Very, very strong, and she's going to be very good for a while to come, at least until Selphie and a few other characters start to show up on our roster. Yuna is definitely a top pick for batteries to bring along into battle, but the only thing you'll wish you had more of is max bravery, but realistically, that's the only problem she has. '20th Century Aladdin has finally awakened to the godly powers that were dormant within him. Vaughn has literally jumped back into the spotlight yet again with his awakening buffs that have fixed many of the issues that have plagued the young Sky Pirate for some time now. His first new passive is High Speed buff that largely raises his speed with active buffs, and this one varies in importance because Vaughn doesn't want so much speed that he's burning through his abilities like a hot knife through butter. His first major buff is to Red Spiral, giving it 1 extra use, allows Red Spiral to trigger Whiteout after 1 use, and both Red Spiral / Whiteout get a moderate bravery damage boost. His next passive, Buff Attack Boost Up, only further adds onto his already massive damage buffs by moderately increasing his max bravery and attack with active buffs even more. This guy is crazy. And the final awakening is to his White Whirl, giving it 1 extra use, allows White Whirl to trigger Luminescence after 1 use, and both White Whirl and Luminescence get a moderate bravery damage boost as well. And I forgot to mention that with Bahamut's release, he got his second 15 CP weapon that slightly increases his max bravery and attack again for 5 turns after breaking an enemy. Overall, Vaughn is back to slay everything that stands in his path, so make way for Captain Bosch. Moving on down the tier, we reach Rem. Our lovely brunette Rem has finally earned herself a top spot with early awakening for use during Noctis' event. Rem had already been buffed previously, so I'll go over it briefly here just to give you a refresher on what she was actually given before her awakenings. First off, she was given an increase of cure uses by 2, and it also grants herself a 40% attack buff. The second buff that she was given was the increase in turn swap uses by 2 as well, and grants herself and the target 30% max bravery up for 3 turns, and raises bravery of Rem and the target by 75% of Rem's attack. Now that we've gone over that information, let's go ahead and look at her awakening buffs. The first being a low bravery attack of 10%, allowing her to give big bursts of bravery or healing to party members after using her HP attack. Cure got buffed as well, allowing Rem to heal more based on max HP / attack, and she now grants the 40% attack buff to the party. Rem's next passive obtained is HP attack up, slightly raising her attack while HP is at 50% of max bravery by 20%, meaning that not only does she have an attack boost after HP attacking, she also gets one before she does the HP attack, which is very useful to help cap more efficiently. And lastly, her second ability, Swap Turns, slightly increases bravery granted based on attack. The potency gain is around 130% of her attack, and a whopping 80% max bravery buff to the swap target. It also turns HP attack to HP attack plus for 5 turns. And HP plus grants half of the HP damage dealt to enemies to allies in the party as bravery. I don't need to say much more than Rem is extremely good right now because of the buff slash battery she offers. But not only that, she can delay an enemy for so long if played correctly. Her only downside is that Swap Turns eats your turns, so be careful, especially when you take her along to harder missions and events like EX missions or Lost Chapters that have stricter turn requirements. Moving on to the last person here that is basically S tier, is kinda Lilithset. Okay guys, here's the truth, Lilithset is actually SS tier. You know, for sorta S tier. But then again, she's more like A.5? Whatever, let's just get to why she's here. Lily is a very above average support and is arguably among the top 5 supports currently in the game, just because of how strong her debuff slash invisible buffs are to the party. Let's jump into what her abilities do, the first one being Whirling Edge with the 15 CP passive. It's a one-hit AoE HP attack that raises own bravery by 20% before inflicting damage and inflicts speed down for 4 turns, while also simultaneously raising her speed for 5 turns. Not the most incredible thing in the world since it's a fairly weak AoE HP attack, but speed down is always wanted, so it gets a pass. Her next ability, Sensual Dance with the 35 CP passive, inflicts a 30% attack down debuff, as well as a 20% magic attack down debuff, and extends both of those durations to 4 turns. Inflicts Sap to all targets for 4 turns. Sap drains targets' bravery by 10% of users' max bravery, grants everyone a 40% max bravery up for 6 turns, and increases bravery gain by 50% of users' max bravery. Whew, what a mouthful, but holy cheese is that a mountain of things packed into just one ability. Not only is she a good battery slash buffer, but her debuffs are just insane for where we are currently in the game. There's also her Moonlight Butterfly that slightly raises initial bravery, max bravery, attack, and defense of all party members when HP is over 50%. And I believe that with a 6-star artifacts, the total stacked amount is around 25%, which is absolutely insane. Lilithset is definitely a force to be reckoned with, but her only downside, like practically every other character, is that you need her weapons to be fully functional. And she's still only 50-50, but you know, that's about it. And we've cleared the first hurdle of S tier. Moving on down to A tier, we start off with Shantotto. The tiny yet almighty Shantotto has finally risen from the depths to unveil her black magic to us all. With her awakening, she got some pretty decent stuff to work with, so let's go ahead and look at what she's got. First up, she gets HP damage attack up, slightly raises attack for 3 turns after taking HP damage, which comes into play with her main abilities since all 3 of them can taunt enemies for 1 turn. Spirit Magic Arrow was buffed, giving it a slight boost in damage, and when it becomes the Rage Arrow, it gains an even higher damage boost as well as a slight boost to her max bravery buff. She gets a Bravery Initiative for higher speed when above 50% max bravery to help with her turn speed. Obviously, she's a little slow, she needs a little bit more speed, so that was their option to give her for extra speed during her turns. And then Dark Magic Bio also got a slight buff to its damage, and when using Rage Bio, the damage buff is a bit higher. Poison will deal slightly more damage and also triggers an HP attack after landing. Finally, she has an HP attack, attached to one of her abilities, which she was lacking severely. Shantotto's final ability given to her by her EX is the Divine Malison, which is a 2-hit Holy Bravery magic attack plus HP attack that debuffs the target to become weak to fire, thunder, wind, and holy. Overall, Shantotto's a great filler character to bring along to help other magic damage dealers. Most of her utility will come from her EX, which is kind of sad, honestly. She still just doesn't have the tools necessary to keep up with many of the S tier characters' damage. Alright, who's next? Tidus! Hey there, favorite character! No matter what the haters say, I still support you and think you're the best, but I've got to treat the list with respect to all the others, so I had to put you here, dude. Not gonna lie, they did do Tidus pretty dirty with these buffs because of how lackluster they are. First off, he gets a speed buff to slightly raise speed with active buffs. But why though? He's already a fast character, why give him more speed? Quick Hit got buffed as well in a very major way, giving it 2 extra uses and moderately raising its damage, which is important because in the 50s era, Slash had a way higher potency in damage, which is bad because Quick Hit is Tidus' Bravery Shaver ability and it was getting outshined by his Bravery plus HP attack, which doesn't really make much sense. Arguably his best buff here is the debuffed attack boost up that moderately raises his max bravery and attack while an enemy is debuffed, giving him stats that Tidus really needed because of how pitiful they made his base stats. Curse you, Square. His final buff that we see is to slash or slash combo if you have his 35 CP, and it gives you 1 extra use and a slight bravery damage boost. While not amazing, it helps to give him a damage upgrade while also keeping it in line to not outdo quick hit in damage. Overall, Tidus has very good longevity and can also dish out some really great damage that apply important debuffs like speed down too. His weakness is his reliance on the overall team composition, as you really have to play around him since he needs so many buffs to get him to really shine. But he's the ace, so you just gotta deal with it. Before we begin to talk about the next character, I want to give a special thank you to Tifa Lockhart, one of our amazing mods over on the DFFOO forums, for allowing me to use her descriptions for some of the characters I'm about to go over right now. There are quite a few, and I'll be sure to let you all know which ones she wrote about. She's been wanting me to give her a shout out on one of my videos, but I had to really think about it since, you know, she speaks heresy about my Church of Tidus. I don't know, maybe if she wouldn't talk so much trash. Seriously, if you guys haven't come to visit us, do it, because sometimes our banter over characters is just pure gold. Okay, let's get to Alisaie. She's decent, not bad even. She has access to 4 different elemental types, which is always nice. Very unique with the black and white mana count, making you want to continuously alternate your attacks for the most potential. At 70 era, she gets a lot better and even becomes a turn-stealing speed queen with a pretty decent EX move that really complements her. But we are in the 60 era, and I must judge her based on her current status. If you have her, you are probably chasing Terra EX. It's okay. She's one of the first 70, so getting a jump start on her stuff isn't a bad idea. She's okay currently, but like I always say, with Overflow changing the meta and her not being able to overflow or battery or buff the party, she's gonna die out really fast. You've got maybe a solid month with her before she falls into the shadows of much better 60s. Next up is Dark Cecil, whose character analysis was also made by Tifa, and she writes, his EX is just around the corner. You have to have his EX if you want to use this guy, as well as have Selphie or another solid healer to back him up for the future. With Valiant Blow being an HP attack, he's somewhat decent and wants to make a comeback. Cloud and Noctis are causing chases with no HP drain, and Fang and Leo are going to come and show him up as well. His EX overflows to 200% and restores a use to each ability. This will give him the sustainability he needs for longer battles if you can keep him alive. It will be one of the next few EXs to drop on an Awakening banner, which means his 15 and 35 will have to be obtained from a banner other than his EX banner. His EX is mandatory. Don't build him unless you're dedicated enough to chase this EX, and keep in mind that Squall is going to want your black T4s and is God tier. Bard's favorite Butts is on the scene. So Bard's got some really nice quality of life buffs during the Kefka event that made him quite a bit more viable than he was during the 50s era. I'll talk about this here right now before we move on to the actual buffs that he got for his enhancements. First up is Double Hand plus Mastered ability. 5 turns max bravery up 2 will now be granted to self upon mastery. Missile plus Mastered ability. Bravery will now be granted to party based on Bard's max bravery. 5 turns speed up will also be applied to self. Mighty Double Hand passive ability further increases damage dealt by Double Hand and Double Hand plus. And finally, Simple Mastery passive ability, area of effect increased from self to party, which is always nice. Those that crystal level 50 passive coming in for the entire party is always going to be good. Bartz becomes a decent battery slash buffer with these quality of life changes, but now onto his awakenings. He gains a slight speed buff upon mastery of an ability, which shouldn't take too long at this point. Double Hand got its mastery requirement reduced by 1, so now it only takes 2 uses to master instead of 3. The last boost passive slightly raises his max bravery if HP is maxed out at the start of the last wave, which is like his crystal 50 passive in and of itself. Lastly, his missile got 1 extra ability use and received a slight damage boost to both missile and missile plus. Butts is no slouch, and he's really been changed for the better with these most recent changes, making him a suitable ally for almost any situation. Well, never thought I'd see the day I'd see Fearing at the top of this list. Alright, time to dust this dude off and put him back on the shelf. To start off, I want to go over his quality of life changes as a refresher before we start talking about his enhancements. And first up is Blood Weapon. Its base use count was increased from 3 to 5. Then Seize Attack base use count was also increased from 3 to 5. Seize Attack Plus replaces Seize Attack with at least 50% HP. 3 turns max bravery up 2 will now be granted to self. And then, of course, the final one here is Attack Proficiency, which is his passive ability. Increases effect to raise an attack. Attack will now also be raised when abilities are used. Because it was pretty bad before, I believe it was only based off of his bravery attacks. If you bravery attacked, it would proc it, but then nothing else would. So it was really, really bad. A really, really bad passive that was really important. Alright, so now let's start off with his first new passive, Initial HP Damage Up, which is very, very bad. It moderately raises initial bravery for 3 turns after taking HP damage. Unless the boss does AoE HP damage, you'll probably never have it up. Blood Weapon got a little better with a slight bravery damage boost and increase to HP recovery limit, which isn't too bad at all. His next passive is HP Initiative, a slight speed boost while HP is at 50% or higher, which is pretty much always going to be active because this guy can just heal himself. Lastly, his Seize Attack got the biggest buff of all with a slight damage boost, and when using Seize Attack Plus, gets an even further damage boost while granting a max bravery up 5 buff. With his 35 CP, Furion becomes a very valuable physical attacker because of his bravery battery potential with Seize Attack, and makes a rightful addition to almost any team comp as well. The oddly mystifying Catwoman Y'shtola finally comes back into the spotlight with her not too inspired awakening. Again, I'll list off her quality of life fixes before going into detail about her awakening stuff, but she honestly doesn't have that much. So first and lastly, Medica 2, base use count increased from 3 to 4. Those were her quality of life changes. That's it. Moving on into her awakening stuff, her first passive is just straight up trash. I don't want it on my artifacts, and I don't want it in my passives. Bravery Guard Up moderately raises defense while HP is at least 50% of max. It's just so bad. Like, why would you even do this to her, Square? Like, this has to be the worst, first awakening passive to give any character so far. Stone got a decent buff with a slight damage boost, 140% potency in case you wanted to know, as well as grants 5 turns of bravery regen, 40% based on initial bravery, which will help with getting her capped out really quickly. This next passive, Last Boost, is just like Butts', where she gets a slight max bravery boost of 30% when HP is max at the start of the last wave, which is good for batteries like her that rely on high max bravery. Finally, Medica 2 also got some big buffs as well. It grants small max bravery up 20% to all allies and slightly raises the bravery gain granted by Medica 2 for a total of 120% of users' max bravery, which means that if Y'shtola has 10,000 bravery, she's literally going to give you 12,000 bravery. Insane. She's very, very good, guys. Overall, Catwoman isn't too awe-inspiring, but can certainly give some really high bravery return to your party during summons, especially now that we have Bahamut. Moving right along, I don't know why this guy isn't Bard's favorite, because it would just make more sense. Thancred has some decent stuff going for him, and even more so with his awakening being released with his Lost Chapter. To start, he gets a moderate speed boost while enemies are debuffed, which is easy enough to maintain because of his poisons. Jugulating Wasp got 2 extra uses, slightly higher potency of 20%, a moderate damage bonus on poison targets for both of his skills and bravery attack of 40% potency, and a 10% increase to his attack up buff. His next passive, Debuff Boost, moderately raises his max bravery by 50% while an enemy is debuffed, allowing him to take full advantage of his increased poison damage. The final buff was to Shadowfang, which raised its potency by 40%, raises damage dealt on poison targets by 50%, and moderately raises the chance to inflict poison. Thancred's buffs are actually ridiculous, but it's too bad no one plays him. Downside is just the fact that he's just another selfish HP attacker who doesn't really benefit the team at all. And his restriction for his damage being that he has to actually have enemies poison for him to deal full damage to get the full result of his damage is just plain bad to begin with. Overall, I think he's very underrated and would definitely shine given the right team comps, but 100% needs to be supported to get any true worth. This next review for Kryl is also from Tifa, and she says, Kryl is no Yuna, but probably the second best battery in the 60 era and pretty decent with Thunder being a bravery plus HP attack, and she's pretty solid as a buffer too. My only concerns are you probably already awakened Cloud or Tidus, and Kate Sith is just around the corner wanting your blue T4s, and him and Selphie are going to be the top 2 buffers / batteries in the 60 era for quite some time. If you already have her stuff and you didn't get Yuna, I won't be upset at you for awakening her. She's pretty solid right now, but just keep in mind you don't have much time before she gets overshadowed. I agree heavily with what Tifa says here about Kryl. She's definitely a strong character right now, especially with some of the over-the-top setups that include Shantoto and Vaughn to just completely and utterly shred enemies to pieces with Elemental Fury. Again, Tifa also wrote up this review for Yuffie that states, she finally gets her quality of life buff and her 35 CP, making her the last character in the game to get her 35 CP, and she may have been decent if this all happened a few months ago, but we're already in the 60s era and her 50 of 50 stuff isn't going to cut it. She's also in the last batch of awakenings for the 60 era, meaning you will be waiting for a long time to use her. But being in the last batch means she's going to get buffed a lot to keep up with the current meta. She gets a Party Isuna, 2 batteries, 4 AoE debuffs, and buffs the party's max bravery. She's a very solid unit at 60 of 60. I used her until 70 era eliminated most of the 60s, as 60 era is doing to 50s. She's going to be on your bench for a long time to come though. Our next entry on this list is Lena. Originally wasn't going to have her here in A tier, but after much persuasion by fellow forum members, changed my mind. Lena is still one of the best healers slash batteries slash buffers in the game, and while not having the greatest max bravery pool, she still has some very useful tools in her kit that make her worthwhile, such as her buffs for immunity to debuffs with bravery regen tied into it. She can still come in very handy for certain fights, so she maintains a fairly high rank even in the 60s era. For now, of course. And plus her damage isn't too shabby, so there's that too. Teardrop boy Leo finally got something worth mentioning, but first I'll list off his quality of life buffs. Command ability Field Burst, increased chance of inflicting force. Force makes it easier to knock back enemies, of course. Command ability Energy Gain, base use count increased from 3 to 4, and 3 turns magic attack up 1 will now be granted to self. Alright Teardrop, let's get this over with since all you got was a 35 CP. Leo's 35 CP made him a lot more viable to bring along since it gives a lot to his kit that was very needed. It increases the potency of Energy Gain, lowers its action delay, and makes it much more easy to initiate a chase sequence. Increases max uses by 1 and increases the potency of mag attack up and extends its duration. Along with this, Leo also becomes a very decent battery with his 35 CP, which helps since he can launch enemies fairly easily. Now his biggest issue is the fact that he isn't guaranteed to launch enemies just yet, and on heavier enemies will usually take a few attacks plus an energy gain to get a successful launch, but this is really the only true weakness he has, aside from still only being 50-50. Ah, what a tragic time indeed. Our man Saz God has finally been dethroned by the age of 60s. Even though Saz hasn't received anything in the last, 4 to 5 months, that doesn't mean he's any worse. Remember, his 35 CP was supposed to be released around this time, so he's still fairly viable should you get his equipment from these campaign banners. As someone who still uses Saz, I can tell you right now that his buffs still hang with the best of them. The only problem is that his max bravery is still fairly low, even though he buffs himself with max bravery, so that's about his only downfall right now. The true hero emerges from his grave to lead his allies into battle. Zack had quite the bit of hype around his release because of just how powerful he is when built and used properly. I've talked about him in some of my previous videos, so I'll quickly go over what he can pull off and move on. On release, Zack was and still is probably one of the strongest HP attacking tanks in the game. His gimmick revolves around him having enemies targeting him to deal much higher damage than normal. Zack is very self-sustainable since he grants himself a huge max bravery buff. I almost want to say it's a 5, but I'm not 100% certain on that. His chain slash taunts as well as gives him a physical resistance up for 4 turns. Yes, I personally think he's better than Snow. He also gains HP regen from his rush assault, meaning you probably won't need to run a healer with this guy if you play well. Overall, Zack is a great starting tank, probably second only to Warrior of Light at this point for obvious reasons, because that dude is just ridiculous now. And the Father of the Year award goes to Sir Jack. Yeah. We finally got Jack to join the battle, and I've got to say he's definitely a powerhouse when built properly. Jack does what he's supposed to do: deal massive damage as quickly as possible, and is basically everything Tidus could hope to be. His Beast Rush is a 3-hit melee bravery attack that grants himself 2 turns of attack up, and with his 15 CP it turns Beast Rush to Beast Rush Plus when bravery is over 30% of max bravery, which triggers an HP attack after the bravery attack hits. Which is pretty good. Like, you know, he doesn't really have an HP plus except for his second ability, but with his weapon passives, it allows him to have HP attacks on both of his abilities, which Tidus wishes he had on quick hit, but you know, that's something we'll talk about at a later time. His next ability is Jet Slash, a 4-hit fire melee bravery attack plus HP attack that grants himself 2 turns of physical attack up, and oh boy does his 35 CP make this move godly. It increases Jet Slash's max usage by 1 and lowers his action delay, grants medium max bravery up for 6 turns, increases the potency of physical attack up, and extends its duration to 6 turns. And just to top it all off, when bravery is over 30% of max bravery, increases the potency of Jet Slash and turns it to Jet Slash Plus, which triggers the same attack a second time. May the faith have mercy on our enemies. Jecht is extremely powerful when paired up with batteries and buffers who can help him achieve his full potential, very reminiscent of his time spent with Lord Braska and Orin, who likely buffed and debuffed for him to deal the most damage possible along their pilgrimage. Unfortunately, he does suffer from low use count, so you've really got to build around him just like Tidus to really see him shine, since both are aces of the team. And onto our final character here of A tier. Sephiroth is still one of the best H characters of the 50s era because of his fairly high damage and max bravery pool. His stacking Genova debuff is still one of the most potent slows in the game to date, and isn't a direct debuff, so it still stacks with other slows like Tidus' speed down too. The only problem you'll likely run into is his low ability use count, but if you have a decent battery, it's possible to balance all that stuff out. Woo! We're almost done with this thing. Moving on to the B and C tiers. I won't be going into detail here except for Snow because he got his awakening, but in these tiers I believe everyone should know why I place these characters where they are. Many of them are still living in the 50s era, being outshined by many of the newly awakened characters. I also just want to explain how I organize these rows as to not create any confusion. First off, I wanted to try something new that I've never done, and I thought that this would be a cool little experiment to try out. The plus signs indicate that the character is either B+ or C+ in their respective ranks. Same goes for the minus signs. The plus sign rows indicate characters who could almost be in that next rank but just don't have enough going for them to justify their position being up higher. The minus rows indicate characters who are beginning to fail in the current times of the game and are at risk of falling down into lower ranks as time goes on. The middle row indicates that those characters belong exactly at their particular rank of B or C. Nothing more and nothing less. If you'd like an explanation for a given character, feel free to comment down below and I'll give you my reasonings for their said position. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about Snow. The big guy just isn't all he's cracked up to be. I'm with Lightning on this one. I don't know what Sarah sees in this dude. Snow got his awakening with his Lost chapter recently. He's decent, but again, just not living up to the expectation, just like in Final Fantasy 13. His first passive is buffed attack boost up that gives him a moderate rise in max bravery / attack with active buffs, which you can definitely use to help him make him more effective. His Seal Guard buff is what truly makes him stand out, as it gets 1 extra use, lock applied to all targets, and moderately increased bravery gain based on initial bravery, slightly increased resistance to first instance of bravery damage, and grants 10 turns of bravery regen. That's a lot to take in, but again, this is his best ability right here. This is what makes him so tanky. In that sense, he is pretty tanky, I'll give him that. This really helps him to take aggro and hold it for longer periods of time, but again, Warrior of Light can just do it better because of shields. He gets his next passive Bravery boost, which moderately raises his max bravery while HP is at least 50% of max. Again, max bravery is all he wants to be effective, so it really helps him out. And finally, Frost Strike gets a decent buff, giving it 2 extra uses, moderate bravery damage boost, and a slight increase of bravery gain based on HP damage, and actually gives him HP recovery of 20% of his overall health. Overall, Snow is fairly self-sufficient and can deal a decent amount of damage, but he still just can't stack up to the likes of Warrior of Light, who can battery, shield, and deal excessive amounts of damage all together. Warrior of Light can actually take risks and not get punished because his shields cover him, while Snow doesn't. Zack can essentially do what Snow does and do it better, even in his 50s, which I find to be just hilarious. Moving on to D tier, everyone should know the deal here. These characters are basically the bottom of the barrel, who really no one uses outside of random curiosity when doing co-op sometimes. Each character in this row has something that will be useful when awoken, but until then they will stay in obscurity because they just can't keep up at all with the current state of the game. And finally, our last tier of the video, E tier. Well, Cater sucks. End of story. Special thanks again to all of you who participated in critiquing my list to help make it a much more solid and reliable source of knowledge for everybody here watching today. Thank you Bard, thank you Tifa, thank you Sigmund, thank you Robi, thank you Star, thank you Mist, Claire, Muffin, Epsilon, Dex, and I feel like I'm missing a few others who were there to help out with the tier list production, but I thank you all too, and I'm sorry if I forgot anybody. Extra special thanks to Hiromuto for providing the Terra and Alice gameplay shown in during their segments of this video, and also to RLA who provided the Lily-Set and Furion gameplay shown during their segments. If you guys would be so kind to check out their channels, and if you're ever on the DFFOO forums, tell them thank you for the help. Hiro has started to stream his library of Final Fantasy games and DFFOO related content from his 3 personal accounts over on Twitch, and has been very enjoyable to watch. I'll leave a link to his Twitch channel down below, and RLA is a very bright and upstanding member in the DFFOO community who uploads her DFFOO videos straight to YouTube. If you're interested in seeing a variety of different characters used for various activities relating to DFFOO, make sure to peep game on her content. I'll leave a link to her channel down below as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, and don't worry, I will be making my return soon, and I'm planning on doing something special with the forums for you guys, so be on the lookout for that. And yeah, until next time, bye guys.